I have a pretty demanding career. I wear many different hats in the community. My family, they can drive me nuts. And I have a pretty decent social life. I'm a wife. I have 2 kids in school. And if you hadn't noticed, I've got another one on the way. So life for me is about to get real interesting. You'd think with all these demands on my time, I'd be a coffee drinker. But instead, my drink of choice is tea. Tea is one of those diverse beverages that can be consumed many different ways. I particularly like to drink my tea hot. You can also drink it chilled on ice. You can have it with sugar, honey, cinnamon, turmeric, mint, ginger. But my favorite is lemons. As you can see, there's a lot of choices that go into making tea. Choices are good. They make you feel empowered, emboldened, independent. Put another way, that's what we call privilege in 2018. See, if you're a white male, well, you've got all the choices in the world. But if you're a person of color, or a woman, or both, like me, you may have the tea bag, but you rarely have the options to make life sweet. And that's what it's like to vote as a person of color in America. Theoretically speaking, voting should be a right. It's our civic duty. It's what we all should be doing. It's an obligation. But for some, voting is actually a privilege. We take for granted the opportunity to get in our car and conveniently go vote. But for some, they don't have it that easily. So the Equity Alliance was founded to remove barriers so that everyone can have equitable access to the voting booth and use their power as a weapon in the fight for social justice. The Equity Alliance story is about how 6 Black women channeled our anger into action and did something about the sour lemons in our community to make sweet tea. Most importantly, this is about how we join the collective fight to save the soul of America. 2012, it was a year that kicked off a series of tragic events that, if you were Black, left a bitter taste in your mouth. Life was full of traumatic lemons. See, in 2012, I'm gonna get through this without crying, my son was born 2 days before Trayvon Martin, he was gunned down by George Zimmerman, all because he was the wrong skin color in a Florida neighborhood that he had every right to be in. And when George Zimmerman was acquitted on all charges, mine and every Black mother's fear was realized that it hit home for me. My son could end up like Trayvon Martin. And nobody would be held accountable for that. Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, Terrence Crutcher. For many, even though most of our Black boys and men were being gunned down by the hands of police, while that was happening, Black residents in Flint, Michigan were being poisoned and exposed to lead poisoning in their drinking water by a government that denied responsibility. And then in the oldest Black church in America, 9 Black church members were gunned down by white supremacists in Charleston, South Carolina. Incident after incident, I became angry at the systems that were supposed to be protecting us. But instead, they were treating people who looked like me unfairly. So what could I do? At this point, I had already worked for several different nonprofits and government agencies. I thought, well, maybe I need to go to law school and become a civil rights attorney. Maybe I become a Black Lives Matter activist and go protest on the front lines. Or maybe I run for office. So instead, after 10 years of public service, I began to realize how we put a Band-Aid on the systems and root causes of inequity and injustice. I began to make the connection between poverty and public policy. When you deconstruct the political system, I realized that everything jacked up about it starts with the vote. So I volunteered on the local school board campaign, and that's where I met two of the black women who would later make sweet tea with me. Christian Buggs, the candidate in the middle, and Tequila Johnson, her campaign manager. I was communications director, and so between the three of us, we made a pretty good team. So much so, we won that race. But it didn't come without some hard, bitter lemons to swallow. First of all, we were told to wait our turn. We're too young to be running for office. Secondly, we didn't have the community support from leaders saying and mentoring us on the do's and don'ts of campaigning. We were just figuring it out on our own. Thirdly, we didn't have thousands of dollars in campaign contributions flowing into our campaign coffers like our opponent did. And sadly, we weren't seeing the engagement from black residents. Even though Metro Schools has a large population of black and brown families, the only people showing up to campaign events were white, affluent East Nashville residents. When it came time to knock on doors and ask for votes, well, we were seeing large pockets of neighborhoods where there were registered voters that were getting ignored. Why was that? What was up with that? So experienced campaign consultants told us, don't waste your time because those people don't vote. Come to find out, those neighborhoods were public housing projects like Casey Homes, where a lot of black people live. That didn't sit well with us. And then the mother of all lemons dropped in our tea, the 2016 presidential election. For me, the election signaled that American values, morals, and laws were on this deep nosedive, all for the sake of maintaining a superior patriarchal power structure. Even if that meant scapegoating black, poor, and brown people, even if that meant disrespecting women, democracy as we know it was headed for a crash landing. And that was the moment I realized that no one was coming to save us. But then I remembered the words of President Barack Obama. He said, change will not come if we wait on some other person or if we wait on some other time. So on November 18th, 2016, day I'll never forget, I called up 5 other of my girlfriends, and these were young, accomplished black women, forward-thinking, doing the dang thing. And I pitched to them my idea for building black political power. And I expected some hesitation and pushback, because this was a bold, risky move for us to undertake outside of our full-time careers. But instead, we did what black women do. We strapped on our capes, sprinkled on our black girl magic, and we got to work. First of all, despite black women leading some of the most progressive movements in this country for a long history, and even though black women are one of the largest, strongest, most reliable voting blocs, only 1% of black women-led organizations receive national investment. So we knew if we were going to embark on this journey, we were going to have little resources. So we each decided to pitch in $250 of our own money to cover startup costs. And still to this day, we have no full-time paid staff. Secondly, in the 2014 midterm election, we ranked as a state, Tennessee ranked 50th in voter turnout, 50th. But being last in the country, that was not by accident. That was a deliberate and successful result of voter suppression tactics to make voting as difficult as possible, especially for African American and Latino voters. So what are some of those tactics? Number one, Tennessee aggressively purges voters for non-participation in elections. Essentially, you are punished for not voting. So how does that work? Let's say you move and you change your address. The state is going to send you a postcard in the mail. If you don't respond, they're going to put you on inactive status. And then if you don't vote in 2 consecutive November elections, which 4 years, then you're pulled from the voter rolls. They don't tell you. Now, this may not seem like a big deal, but for historically black and brown people, we have lived either as working class or lived in poverty. And what do poor people do? They move around a lot. They're transient. Their phone numbers change quite a bit. They're renting apartments, changing addresses. So they're more than likely, less likely to receive that postcard in the mail. And if they do, they're probably not going to respond because they're too busy trying to survive and put food on their table. They're not thinking about that postcard. So they have a better chance of being purged. Secondly, in Tennessee, you must be registered to vote 30 days in advance. Now, when do most people start thinking about who they're going to vote for? Usually about a month before an election, right? Or maybe a couple of weeks before. By that time, if you're thinking about getting in the race, or if you've just moved here from out of state and want to change your registration, it's too late for you. Why do we make it this difficult when some states have same-day voter registration or automatic voter registration? What's stopping Tennessee from having that same process? Third, Tennessee has some of the strictest voter ID laws on the books. Voter ID laws typically disenfranchise poor citizens, elderly citizens, Black and brown citizens, and college students. Whereas it was once okay for you to take your utility bill or voter registration card to go vote, now I must bring a government-issued photo ID. Now, the most commonly photo ID is the driver's license. But if I'm elderly and I don't drive, well, I probably don't have a driver's license. Or if I'm a college student from out of state, I don't have an in-state Tennessee driver's license. Or if I'm poor and I don't have a car and I take the bus everywhere, I might not need a driver's license. So now as a state, we have created an extra hurdle for some people to go vote. Fourth, Tennessee is one of 27 states that participates in a database called Crosscheck. A lot of people don't know this. This database is used to match your first name, last name, and date of birth to make sure you're not registered to vote in multiple states. Now, this database has some built-in racial bias because it's more than likely going to ping ethnic names. So, for example, if I have a common last name like Rodriguez, I could be accused of being the Michelle Rodriguez in, say, Texas, and be taken off the voter rolls. And in order to get back on, I have to prove that I'm Michelle Rodriguez from Tennessee and respond to a postcard to do it. Now, people say, supporters of Crosscheck say, this cuts down on voter fraud. That's all well and great, except there's one problem. This database has been proven by Harvard and Stanford researchers to be 99% inaccurate. 99%. And Tennessee still uses it. Now, I could keep going, but these are some of the most egregious ways that we keep citizens from voting in Tennessee. Some of these tactics, for too long, my community has been denied access and equitable representation at the voting booth. We've been led to believe that our vote doesn't matter. And when we do go vote, we get frustrated because our vote is taken for granted because we see little in return from our elected officials. The Equity Alliance, we challenged politics as usual and pushed back and said, we need a new way of approaching Black voters, and looked at why are we doing it this way? Not anymore. Not on our watch. We didn't ask for permission. We didn't wait our turn. Instead, we're just out here doing the work. We're challenging the status quo. We're proving that we can organize our own communities because we know what's best for us. We've hosted town halls. We have called out elected officials when we saw injustices happening. We created the Voting is Lit campaign because we wanted to insert Black culture in our outreach strategy to make voting something you can be proud of and excited about. We also built coalitions with existing organizations and key leaders in the community. We also organized in churches, nightclubs, public housing projects, community events, and we did it through civic organizations. Now, this last election, we were able to recruit 700 volunteers and paid canvassers. We built a coalition and we registered over 86,000 Black voters across the state. Yeah, thank you. We knocked on doors. We sent over 130,000 text message reminders. We made phone calls. We deployed volunteers across the state to do voter protection and watch the polls. We published the Nashville Voter Guide 3 times this year, and it's been downloaded and distributed over 8,000 times. Now, that's just to name a few. We've done some other things you can read. But as a result, Tennessee went from 50th in voter turnout to number 1 in early voter turnout. Yep. We also set a new midterm record in the state with 2.2 million voters. That's almost like a presidential election. That's unheard of for a midterm. Young voters came out in unprecedented numbers. Their turnout increased from 2014 by 664%. And Black voter turnout, 413%. Yeah, we did that. We were able to accomplish in 2 years what we set out to do in 4. And let me remind you, we did this with no full-time paid staff. So, the work we've done in Tennessee is part of a larger story that's happening all across the country. 2018 proved to be the year of the woman, particularly women of color. Hello. Stacey Abrams, anybody? Women of color have stepped out of the shadows and demanded that our voices be heard and our contributions be recognized. For too long in this country, women have been silenced for speaking out against injustice. Our passion has been mistaken for pessimism. Our activism has been mistaken for anger, and our weariness mistaken for weakness. But despite that, over 100 women ran for Congress and won. Many of them will be the first Black, Latina, Native American, Muslim, youngest women to represent their state. Yeah. If there's anything that the 2016 presidential election showed me, it's that it woke up the minority. And it showed us that government is not going to save us. We are. There's a new girl rising, and it looks like me. Young, Black, educated, female, and woke. Oh, thank you. So, as I close, the Equalliance, we showed you that you can't have the sweet without the bitter. Unfortunately, bad things had to happen in order for us to see the good. As women, together, we have more in common than we do as individuals. But individually, you have a lot to offer the common good. As my co-founder likes to say, we all can't do everything, but we can all do something. So if you're like me and you like your tea with lemon, then I urge you to join me in finding those lemons that are making your community sour, and then use those lemons to make your own sweet tea.